The silence in this small mud brick hut near the Nile carried a different weight, a heavy stillness that settled into your bones before the first pale light of dawn dared to touch the cracked earth. Outside, the sky was a faded wash of blue-gray, as if the world itself sighed under the burden of endless struggle. You woke there in the dim half-light, your skin prickling with the scratchy linen that barely kept the most persistent insects at bay. The air was thick with dust and the faint bitterness of last night's fire, charred reeds that still clung stubbornly to your senses, like a stubborn memory refusing to fade. Around you, the village lay silent, cloaked in a thin veil of haze that made the distant goats' bleating sound almost ghost. The ground beneath your feet was hard, the cracked earth hardened by weeks of relentless sun and the scarce mercy of the Nile's flooding. You shifted, your muscles aching from yesterday's endless grind, the wooden bucket feeling like it carried the weight of the world each time you pulled it from the well. The sky promised another day uncannily like the last, long, slow, and mercilessly unchanging. If today a dead phone battery feels like a personal apocalypse, imagine the crushing despair of watching your last firewood turn to ash in a time when warmth meant survival. You stole a moment by the dim fire, small, sputtering, its glow a fleeting comfort against the creeping chill. Around it, neighbors exchanged tired glances, faces carved by sun and hardship, yet bound by that fragile hope that the day might offer something better. But the promise was thin. The coarse grain you crushed between your calloused hands would feed more than hunger. It was mixed with sand and crushed stalks to stretch the meager rations. Every bite a reminder of scarcity, every swallow a small act of defiance. Suddenly, a strange hush fell. The usual cacophony of barking dogs and morning chatter died as if snuffed out by an unseen hand. You caught a flicker of tension, a hard line drawn between neighbors' eyes, unspoken but unmistakable. Something was coming, a shadow darker than the Nile's murky waters, and it was about to pull the village into a new kind of endurance. Before the silence swallowed all, you felt it, the slow, creeping dread that survival had more chapters yet to write, each one harsher than the last. Hey, before Morpheus takes you completely, check quickly if you're still subscribed. For some, the button has gone missing, and I wouldn't want you to miss the next bedtime stories. Drop a like, soft as a pillow, and tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Your interaction keeps this little corner of calm alive. Thanks for being part of it. The silence that had fallen felt less like peace and more like a cautious breath held underwater. You stood slowly, limbs stiff and skin prickling, not just from the scratchy weight of fabric, but from the lingering sense that the stillness outside was waiting, watching. The sky had shifted, a shade deeper, the blue-gray now heavy like wet cloth. Shreds of mist hugged the ground, swallowing shapes and muffling the distant bleats of goats that seemed suddenly too far away. Your hands, cracked and coarse from hauling water, flexed against the rough wood of the bucket handle. The well's stones were cool beneath your fingers, but today, even that small comfort felt distant. You glanced around the hut's shadowed interior, where the thin tendrils of smoke curled lazily upward from last night's fire, now just cold ashes and charred reed. The odor lingered, a sharp reminder that warmth was once borrowed, not owned. Outside, the village breathed in cautious rhythms. The soft click of sandals against cracked earth was almost swallowed by a quiet so dense you could feel it, pressing against your ears. Nearby, a woman shifted, her face briefly catching the firelight before melting back into shadow. No words passed between you, only the shared weight of a morning that refused to start with anything other than worry. The air was dry enough to crack lips and skin, but a faint, strange sweetness rode on the breeze, an edge of something new, maybe carried by the Nile's slower current these days. Your gaze turned toward the horizon, where the river, usually a busy thread of life, now seemed flattened. Its usual rush was gone, leaving only calm, almost sinister smoothness. You thought of the grain, the last handful, crushed between calloused palms yesterday, had felt like sand, and not the kind washed clean by waves, but gritty, stubborn earth that clung to your skin and teeth. Stretching meager food with broken stalks was not just about hunger anymore. It was survival draped in thin hope, a fragile promise to keep moving one more day. And now, that silence, the unnatural quiet, pressing down with an oppressive weight. The dogs, always ready to bark at the smallest disturbance, had gone mute. Even the usual mumble of early voices was absent, swallowed by something unseen. Eyes shifted, quick and tense between neighbors, as if the secret they all shared slipped just beneath the surface. A storm was gathering, but this was no cloud in the sky. You wrapped your shawl tighter, its rough fabric scraping against your throat as shadows deepened under your breath. The village elders gathered near the drying well, their faces carved by many such mornings. Their murmurs were low, a rustle of leaves in dry weather, carrying messages you couldn't catch but felt nonetheless. A warning spelled out in every narrow glance, every held-in breath. Your own body tensed, muscles remembering yesterday's labor, the relentless pull of harsh days, the ache that settled deep in bones as proof of living. But today's heaviness wasn't just from work. It was laden with an uncertainty no amount of routine could soften. You stepped outside, the cracked earth crunching underfoot. The sun was a reluctant visitor, faint and diffuse through the haze. Dust drifted lazily, settling on everything like an unwelcome blanket. Somewhere to the west, small clouds gathered, casting long shadows across the fields. But the air was still, the kind of still that presses against your skin and amplifies every sound. Your eyes caught the flicker again, a subtle movement beyond the village boundary, a ripple in the trees lining the riverbank. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then came the soft crack of breaking branches, a sudden rustle that sent a flurry of dry leaves into the air, swirling like startled ghosts. Neighbors stirred, the tension snapping into motion. Murmurs rose, tense whispers, tossing questions without answers. The elders' faces tightened, and you noticed hands falling to tools, hoes, digging sticks, weapons barely more than sharpened sticks. The fragile calm shattered in the space between beats. A lone figure appeared at the valley's edge, emerging from the dust and shadow. A silhouette, hunched and moving with deliberate steps that told stories of distance, traveled, and burdens carried. The figure carried nothing visible, but the weight was evident in a slow slump of shoulders that might have once stood straighter. For a moment, you dared to hope this was just a traveler, a rare visitor, bringing news or trade, a crack in the endless sameness. But as the figure drew closer, you saw the weariness etched across the face beneath a dirt-caked shawl, saw eyes wide with something colder than fatigue. The village held its collective breath. The dogs, sensing the shift, broke their silence with low growls that soon gave way to frantic barking. The once soft morning gave way to a cacophony that clawed at your ears. You felt the weight of unspoken words settling, a shadow darker even than the last ash of the fire. The visitor halted at the boundary, shoulders shaking slightly as a ragged breath escaped. In that trembling pause, you could swear even the Nile held still, watching what was to come. And then, finally, the whisper spread, a name carried on the breeze like a warning. Danger. Not the ordinary kind born from hunger or drought, but something different, something that would steal the fragile hope sealed within cracked mud walls. You stepped forward, heart pounding with the old ache of uncertainty, and deeper, a flicker of something new. Because when survival spins this close to the edge, every moment after promises either ruin or revelation. The sky darkened, and the coming day stretched before you, a tale yet unwritten, but one already heavy with portent. And in the distance, a sudden shout pierced the morning stillness, sharp and urgent, breaking the fragile calm like glass. The shout cracked through the stillness like a sudden crack in thin ice, sharp and urgent, dragging every breath into its wake. You froze, muscles coiled tight as the fragile morning shattered instantly. Shadows lengthened, pooling around you like spilled ink as the village stirred at once, a collective pulse reawakened by the sound. Eyes darted toward the river's edge, where the lone figure had paused, shoulders trembling just moments before. Now, the visitor's head snapped up, scanning the village as though searching for a single face among the worn and wary. A flicker of something fierce flashed in those dark eyes. Fear or warning, or perhaps both, tangled together like the reeds along the Nile's bank. The uneasy murmur among the elders grew louder. Their cracked voices rose in hurried whispers, a chorus of guarded urgency. You could almost taste the dust swirling in the heated air, mingling with the metallic hint of adrenaline that rose like smoke in your chest. The day, once promised as slow and mercilessly unchanging, now felt sharp-edged and fractured, something slicing through the usual weariness with a strange new bite. You stepped forward, boots stirring dry earth. The village held its breath with you, the packed mud firm beneath your soles. But the calm was brittle. The distant bleating of goats returned, but now it was shrill and uneasy, echoing like a plaintive warning under the clouded sky. The river flowed quietly, its dark surface disturbed only by lazy ripples that failed to mask the tension looming like a storm on the horizon. The visitor straightened, a slow, deliberate gesture that seemed to carry the weight of many miles trudged under sun and doubt. The shawl fell back, revealing a face mapped by dirt and sweat, eyes sunken but alert. When they spoke, the voice was low and hoarse, but every word carried the weight of urgent truth. Trouble came the single word, but in it hung a universe of meaning. From the east, desperate ones, desperate times. A hush fell again, heavier this time, as if the village had swallowed an ominous secret whole. Mothers gathered their children closer, the rough linen of their wraps scratching at tender skin, a small comfort against the unknown. You felt the prickling down your neck grow sharper, a silent alarm sounding beneath your skin, the kind of fear that makes even the air itself seem thick and slow. The elders exchanged quick, sharp looks, a code older than the cracked mud walls. They whispered of elders past, of warnings carried on the winds, of nights when the desert's dark brought more than cold. No one needed to say it aloud. What approached was not mere hunger or drought, but something that tore deeper, something that could unravel everything held dear. Your fingers tightened around the wood handle of the bucket you still carried from the well. The familiar roughness grounded you, a brittle lifeline to a world slipping toward uncertainty. Your gaze swept the horizon, the low hills beyond the fields, where the desperate ones gathering like shadows growing at dusk. The wind picked up, stirring dust in swirling eddies that caught in your hair and scratched against your face like tiny ghosts brushing past. A faint scent, smoke old and acrid, wafted on the breeze. Someone else noticed it too, murmurs rising like restless spirits. From the far side of the village, a young man sprinted toward the heart of the settlement, breath ragged and footsteps pounding against the endless, cracked earth. His face was pale, eyes wide with news that would not wait. Voices rose to meet him, questions born from panic, threading quickly through the crowd. Whispers of fires beyond the riverbank, of distant fires that devoured what little green remained, swelled into unsettled voices. The slow vanishing of fish from the water, the missing shepherds last seen beyond the hills, the desperate exodus of wild animals, refugees even among creatures. A tremor quivered beneath your feet. Was it the earth, or the tremble of hearts bracing for something unseen? You swallowed hard, the dryness in your throat suddenly worse than any hunger. There was no room for quiet hope now. You glanced back to the visitor, whose presence had torn the day apart, whose tired eyes now drilled into you with an unspoken plea, or perhaps a warning. The village, once cocooned in routine, now teetered on the edge of chaos. Prepare, the visitor's voice came again, this time to all who would hear. Gather what you can. The evening comes fast, and with it, the reckoning. By now, the sun was a weary glow behind the haze, casting an eerie light that stretched shadows longer than comfort allowed. Women and men alike moved through the village like flickering embers, readying for a night that promised to be anything but safe. Yet amidst the rising clamor, a small flicker of fire sparked near the center. Hands, not yet hardened by endless labor, bent together to shield the flame, eyes watching its fragile glow, as if its mere existence could defy the darkness gathering without. Your breath hitched, heart ferocious in its beat. The day had spun wild from the slow grind of survival to a sharp edge, poised on the precipice of what no one dared name. You pulled your shawl tighter, the rough flax biting at your neck like a bitter reminder. Nothing here was guaranteed anymore. And in that breathless moment, before the night's unknown descended, a distant horn sounded, low, mournful, and resonant, rising over the land like a scream caught in the throat of the wind. Somewhere beyond the hills, answered by silence, the reckoning was not waiting. It had already arrived. The shout had shattered the fragile hush like shattering glass, and now the village throbbed with awakening, a pulse racing through dry bones and hardened skin. You felt it deep inside you, a sudden sharpening of senses that left the tight grip of fear settled like poison in your gut. The visitor's eyes locked with yours, those dark, sunken orbs filled with a kind of grim warning that asked more than words could carry. You saw the crease of exhaustion deepen on their face, as if carrying not just miles, but the weight of impossible news. Their breath came in ragged pants, blending with the ragged chorus of villagers bristling with unease. You stepped closer, the cracked dirt crunching beneath worn sandals. Around you, neighbors shifted restlessly, hands going reflexively to worn tools and faded weapons, the sharpest defense in a land that knew hunger but feared far worse. The air, tasted of dust and sweat, thick and brittle, but beneath it something else teased at your tongue. The faint hint of smoke, old and acrid, curling on the breeze with a scent that pulled old fears to the surface. Voices rose, fracturing into fierce whispers. Fires across the floodplain. Gone are the shepherds, last seen near the blackened groves. They say, the animals fled before the hunger came. Each word struck like a pebble tossed into still water, setting ripples of dread that radiated until even the distant Nile seemed to hold still, its dark waters reflecting the uneasy sky. You glanced at the elders, their faces like cracked leather maps, eyes narrowed with the recognition of legends reborn. The stories they whispered were no simple tales, but warnings of a shadow creeping from beyond the hills, a returning hunger that devoured more than crops. Yet even as the weight of those words pressed upon you, a faint warmth stirred low in the village's heart. Near the center, a sputtering flame clung stubbornly to life, its small orange glow fighting the coming dusk and dark uncertainty. It drew faces close, rough hands, steadying the fragile blaze, eyes narrowing against the smoke, but restless for its comfort. For a heartbeat, you let yourself lean into the fire's breath, feeling its thin promise of hope prick at the edges of your frozen resolve. The air still hummed with fear, but here was a steady pulse beneath it, a stubborn ember of togetherness that defied the creeping shadow. Then the visitor's voice broke through the tight knot of tension, low and urgent as the wind itself. "Prepare," they said, voice cracked but fierce. "The desperate come fast. With nightfall, it will be too late to gather strength." The crowd stiffened. Mothers hushed their children, clutching them close beneath coarse wraps. Men and women moved like whispered spirits across cracked earth, gathering what meager tools and provisions they could find. The village was a living thing, its heart beating faster with each passing moment, its breath held tight against what was to come. You felt your fingers tighten against the rough wood of the bucket still clenched in your hand, a strange anchor in a world unraveling too quickly. Your eyes darted toward the hills where shadows lengthened and the wind stirred the last brittle stalks of grain. A sudden tremor, subtle but real, swept beneath your feet. Not earth, perhaps, but the collective shudder of a village breathing in dread. Beyond the riverbank, the distant line of trees wavered, blurred by heat and dust, and there, a slash of movement where none should be. Your breath hitched as the silhouette of others appeared, ragged figures pressing forward through the haze. Their shapes were ragged, gaunt and desperate, carved from the same harsh land that had already taken so much. Your heart hammered. This was no ordinary hardship. This was a reckoning. A fierce cry ripped from the visitor's throat, fracturing the gathering dusk. It was a cry that spoke of battle and flight, of survival sharpened to a desperate edge. Around you, the village responded as one, a chorus of readiness born from many such dawns and nights of fear. The sky, or what little could be called sky beneath the mud-heavy clouds, grew heavier, the faint light waning as shadows pooled like spilled ink across cracked earth. A stray breeze whispered through the village, swirling dust and whispers alike, carrying with it a faint taste of smoke and something else, the iron tang of impending war. You swallowed hard. This was a beginning unlike any before, a day breaking not with hope, but with a reckoning written in the faces of those who had no choice but to stand. Your gaze locked again on the visitor. Their breath still rattled, pulse pounding in time with the village's rising panic. But in that same gaze was a stubborn spark, fierce and unyielding. And as the distant horn groaned once more, echoing over hills and empty fields, you knew the calm had shattered for good. Tonight, survival would no longer be measured in days or weeks. Tonight, the night itself would tell the tale. The village was alive now, not with the sleepy rhythm of daily toil, but with a raw pulse of fear and sudden alertness. The brittle wind carried whispers and hurried footsteps, colliding with the low crackle of the stubborn fire still flickering near the heart of the settlement. Its fragile glow was a beacon, a stubborn flicker against the creeping dusk that seemed bent on swallowing everything. You tightened the shawl around your shoulders, the rough fibers biting at your skin like the days behind you, each one etched deep with exhaustion, but also a silence thick with unspoken dread. The visitor's warning echoed in your mind, a single word heavy as a stone: prepare. Feet shuffled across parched earth, hoofs stamped afar as the remaining goats anxiously circled, senses twitching at the same tension weaving through the village. The very air felt charged, as if the sky itself strained against the weight of the coming night. You cast a quick glance toward the darkening horizon, where the hills cut jagged silhouettes against the dimming light. A faint column of smoke curled upward beyond the riverbank, thin and hungry, like the breath of something waking. The scent drifted to you, bitter and cold, a wound reopened. In the gathering crowd, younger faces tightened with nervous energy, while the elders' weathered eyes held memories deeper than this moment. They moved with quiet purpose, gathering old but sturdy tools, securing what food remained, and whispering prayers into the thinning daylight. Hands roughened by years of labor brushed grain into sacks, while others coated stone jars with enough water to last through the uncertain hours. Your own fingers tightened once more around the bucket's wooden handle, a small comfort in a world rapidly unraveling. The visitor's gaze swept the crowd, landing on you for a heartbeat longer than felt comfortable. In those eyes, sunken and fierce, you felt an urgent plea, a silent charge to stand firm, even as the shadows grew bolder. The muffled murmur of the village grew into a tangled symphony of voices, cracks and stirrings that echoed off the mud brick huts like the first tremors before a storm. Children were gathered close, tucked beneath rough cloths that smelled faintly of earth and smoke. The tension clung to their small bodies like a second skin, and your heart skittered with a protective ache. Then, a sudden surge of movement, figures darting from the edges of the settlement, carrying bundles and hurried. Whispers. The stories had taken shape. The desperate were coming. Eyes met again along the dusty paths. Silent questions spun between neighbors. How many? How fast? And under what shadow would they arrive? You swallowed the dry scratch of your own throat and turned toward the river. Its waters, once a steady lifeline, now held a depthless stillness that slivered uneasily across the surface. The sky, a canopy of muted grays and bruised blues, pressed low, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. Behind you, footsteps quickened. A young woman stumbled forward, cheeks streaked with dirt and tears shining in her wide eyes. She spoke in a voice barely above the wind's whisper, words spilling fast. They burn the fields. The shepherds are gone, taken or fled. The animals vanish with them, and the hunger, it's not just ours anymore. It grows like fire in dry grass. The crowd stilled, breathing caught in their chests. You felt the cold spike of dread trek across your spine, a nightmarish echo of stories told long ago, tales of darkness that fed on fear and fractured hope. The fire's glow pulsed faintly in front of you, a stubborn heartbeat against the gathering gloom. You reached out, wanting to steady the flame, but your hands trembled, betraying the weight you carried. Will we be ready? A voice cracked, sharp but quiet, almost lost beneath the rising wind. No one answered. The question hung between the cracked walls and dusty streets like a flickering shadow. Then the soft lament of a horn, low, mournful, reverberating across the hills, shook the stillness once more. It was a call and a warning tangled into one note, stretching along the river's length and beyond, sinking into the earth like a sigh. For a moment, the village stood silent, the sound folding around every soul like a shroud. From the edge of the settlement, shapes began to appear, dark figures emerging from the dust and fading light. Their pace was urgent but uneven, a ragged determination carved by exhaustion and despair. You traced their sluggish progress, each step a testament to how far they'd come. The visitor stepped forward, voice barely carrying above the murmurs. They have crossed the floodplain. Desperation drives them, and with it, sharp edges not seen in many seasons. The crowd shifted uneasily, hands reaching for anything that might shield or strike, eyes searching the dim horizon. Every breath drawn was sharp with fear, every silence heavy with the weight of what might come. Your gaze locked on the nearest figure, a woman whose eyes flicked like coals smoldering beneath ash. Their edges wavered, blurred by heat and dust, but her look was clear, raw, urgent, and painfully human. You felt the first tremor of a reckoning, not the slow grind of survival you knew, but a fracture ripping through the fabric of everything familiar. The wind caught a fold of your shawl, drawing it tight around your neck. It bit like a warning, as if the night itself had teeth. And then, from somewhere deeper in the gathering dusk, a new sound rose, a low chant, and resonant, carried across the cracked earth and carried your blood along with it. The desperate were here, and with the night falling fast, there would be no turning back. The muffled chant drifted through the thickening dusk, a brittle prayer against the coming night. You pulled your shawl tighter, the rough flax biting into your skin like a sharp whisper of what was to come. The low fire flickered stubbornly, its orange glow a fragile heartbeat amid the gathering shadows. Faces, young and old, leaned in, eyes searching for warmth, where fear threatened to snuff out every ember of hope. The cracked earth underfoot was dry as bone, but it carried the tremble of a village waking fully to the threat that now pressed close. You glanced toward the river, its usually steady current, now a dull, unmoving mirror reflecting the bruised sky. Near the banks, the thin column of smoke writhed upward again, this time thicker, like a beast exhaling pain into the air. Somewhere beyond, the distant hills loomed dark and unresolved. A hollow wind slid over the plain, rattling loose stones and stirring the brittle stalks of grain that still clung to the fields. The sound was a low sigh, carrying with it the bitter scent of burned leaves and dried blood, reminders of desperate fires already past and those yet to burn. Voices rose and fell like restless winds, a murmuring tension threading through the village. Mothers clutched children close, their rough fingers tracing worn cloths with quiet urgency. Men's hands hovered near forgotten spears and worn tools, instinct sharpening despite exhaustion. The visitors stood near the fire, eyes dark with a fierce light, scanning the crowd and the dark horizon beyond in measured silence. Your own breath came in ragged bursts, throat tight as dry earth, the familiar weight of the wooden bucket an anchor amidst the mounting dread. You felt the sting of cracked skin and grit embedded beneath your nails. Small, everyday pains now sharpened into a dull ache of vulnerability. Sudden movement fractured the uneasy calm. From the far edge of the village, a dark cluster shifted, a ragged line of figures pressing forward slowly but relentlessly, their shadows stretched thin by the fading light. You caught the glint of tired eyes, the hitch of unsteady steps, and the weight of despair carried on bent shoulders. Not strangers, but the desperate, those who once tended the distant herds, the forgotten paths, now driven by hunger's cold hand to seek refuge here. Stories tangled in the air, Burned fields, vanished shepherds, and animals fleeing into deeper wilderness, leaving only stark silence in their wake. The visitor stepped forward, voice low but steady as a river's current. They are close now, fewer in number, but fiercer, claws sharpened by starvation and fear. A ripple ran through the crowd. The air thickened, every whisper a fragile thread tying hearts to the reality looming closer. You swallowed hard, tasting dust and smoke on your tongue. The small fire's glow cast shadows that danced like ghosts on cracked mud walls, and for a moment you almost saw the village itself as one fragile flame, each person a flicker, struggling not to be snuffed out. The visitor's gaze met yours again, fierce and pleading. There was no room for hope left undefined. The reckoning would come with nightfall, and tonight every heartbeat counted. A sudden shout shattered the growing tension, the sharp cry reverberating through the narrow alleyways and empty fields beyond. The village snapped into motion, like a living thing, waking from a long, uneasy sleep. Tools were gripped tighter, feet quickened steps, and the children's hushed sobs curled beneath the heavy sky. You moved toward the village center, where the elders gathered, their faces etched deeply with memories of long battles between nature's cruelty and human will. One stepped forward, voice cracking but carrying command. Prepare for the darkness. Gather what you must. Every hand will be needed. The soft chant arose once more, weaving through the clatter of hurried preparations. Yet beneath it, a harsh rhythm pulsed, the quickened beat of a land once patient, now unraveling. Your eyes scanned the horizon again. The first desperate figures were edging closer, their gaunt forms now illuminated faintly by the moon's slow rise. Their shadows stretched long, hungry and raw, dissolving into the dim outline of trees lining the distant hills. Near the river's edge, the water whispered inanely, as if the Nile itself mourned the coming storm. Somewhere, a dog barked once, sharp and terrified, a sound swallowed almost immediately by the gathering night. The visitor's voice cut through the gathering noise one last time. They carry nothing but hunger and the sharp edge of survival. We have no choice but to meet them. Your heart thundered against ribs worn thin by days of toil and nights of worry. Each step you took felt heavier, laden not just with the literal weight of the bucket, but with the unspoken understanding that this night would test everything. And as you caught a faint glimmer of light, reflecting off a distant metal blade, a slow, dreadful realization settled deep in your bones. The reckoning was no longer approaching. It had already begun. Night had spilled across the village like thick ink, swallowing colors and blending mud bricks into darkened shapes. The small fire near the center flickered weakly, its orange glow, a lone heartbeat battling against the pressing shadow. You stood a few paces away the rough fibers of your shawl scratching as the cold seeped deeper beneath your skin. The last remnants of sunlight sank behind hills that now loomed like silent sentinels, swallowing the horizon whole. Around you, the village moved with hurried whispers and muted clatter, hurried hands gathering dusty sacks and worn tools, voices wrapped low in urgent murmurs, filled with dread. Mothers tightened their children's wraps, their eyes glancing toward the thickening gloom beyond the cracked walls. The earth beneath your boots was dry and brittle, cracking faintly with each step, as if echoing the fractures growing in the hearts of all present. The visitor stood close to the fire, their gaze scanning every shadow, every muted movement, before settling briefly on your face. That look held unspoken truths, not just warnings, but a silent call to stand, no matter how fragile the ground beneath seemed. A sudden breeze stirred dust and ashes, carrying the bitter scent of smoke and scorched earth. The thin column rising from distant fields grew thicker, curling upward like a serpent's restless sigh. Somewhere beyond the riverbank, flames licked devouring tongues against dry stalks, feeding on what little the relentless sun had spared. You swallowed hard, tasting dry grit on your tongue, and felt the weight of the wooden bucket in your hands shift. It felt heavier now, burdened not just by water, but by the unyielding weight of impending reckoning. Voices rose again, more insistent this time, threaded with fear and haste. Stories of stolen shepherds, vanished herds, and fires moving like hungry beasts spread through the crowd. The tension tightened, a taut line straining to snap. Yet, beneath the rising panic, the low crackle of the fire persisted, obstinate and steady, a fragile refuge in the gathering storm. You caught a sharp breath from a woman nearby, her face etched with dust and tears, eyes wide with remembered terror. "They come worse than before," she whispered, voice brittle, driven not only by hunger, but by loss, by something darker. Her words hung like the evening mist, thick and chilling. The visitor moved forward, voice steady, but edged with raw urgency. "They've crossed the floodplain. Closer now, fewer in number, but harder to hold back. Sharpened by despair and desperate enough to break every barrier." The crowd shifted uneasily. Fingers lingered near faded weapons, tools held tight as fragile lines of defense. Children clung closer to trembling parents. The night grew colder, and the sky pressed lower, heavy as a shroud. Your eyes fixed on the river, the surface unrested, rippling with shadows, as if the water itself dreaded what moved nearby. The moon, a pale guardian, cast a ghostly pale light that painted the cracked earth in silver and ash. A sharp crack rang out suddenly, the sound of a snapped branch, or perhaps a heavy footfall. Heads snapped toward the village edge, where shapes moved with ragged purpose. their outlines blurred by dust and darkness. The desperate had arrived. Their forms were gaunt, twisted by hunger and exhaustion, but fierce, eyes burning with the ember of survival, sparked beyond hope. They moved with a slow, relentless urgency, as if the land itself pushed them forward. The visitor's voice cracked through the tense quiet. They carry nothing but bare hands and broken dreams, and a hunger that bites deeper than famine. A tremor passed through your chest, not of earth, but of raw, primal fear. You tightened your grip on the bucket, heart pounding in rhythm with the frantic pulse beating through the village. Near the fire, someone lit a small torch. Its flickering flame sent dancing shadows among the crowd, silhouettes stiffening in silent vows of resistance. The glow was meager, a flicker of fragile hope in a night heavy with danger. Your breath caught as a distant howl broke the silence, a mournful sound rising with the wind, threading through cracked alleyways and open fields. The sharp bark of a dog answered it, tense, fearful, echoing the same alarm, tightening every muscle around you. The visitor's dark eyes met yours once more, fierce, pleading, the flame of determination barely dimmed by exhaustion. "Tonight," they said, voice low and rough, "we either stand together or fall apart." The village stirred as one. Men and women moved with silent resolve. Children huddled close, and the fire's glow seemed to pulse with newfound strength, a heartbeat kept alive by every trembling hand. You took a slow step forward into the thickening night, the rough earth crunching beneath your feet, uncertain but unyielding. In the distance, the ragged figures pressed on, swallowing the gap with a desperate hunger no fire could chase away. And just as the night deepened, a sudden scream tore through the dark, raw, sharp, and close. The fragile calm shattered, scattering like dry leaves. Shadows exploded into motion, arms raised, voices shouting. Your heart slammed against your ribs as the reckoning unfurled its first violent thread. The night had come, and with it, the fight for everything left to hold. And somewhere on that edge of darkness, a single spark flared, threatening to ignite the fragile dawn itself. The night had swallowed sound and shape, but beneath the dense quiet, a restless undercurrent pulsed through the village. You stood just beyond the fire's fragile glow, the rough fabric of your shawl rasping against your neck, a constant reminder of the day's stubborn grind left etched in every scratch and ache. Around you, the settlement moved like slow tides, figures bending over sacks, whispering shadows weaving between mud brick walls. The brittle earth beneath your feet cracked under uneven steps, each one a soft percussion marking time under the heavy breath of the dark sky. The visitor's voice had barely faded, but their warning lingered, an echo etched in the tight line of your shoulders and the way the elders' faces pressed into resolute masks. The desperate come fast, they had said, and now the desperate were carving shapes from the dusk beyond the floodplain. Your gaze strayed to the horizon, where the smoke's thin fingers clawed upward, painting the air with the acrid scent of burned hopes. The river's surface was an oily mirror, dark and unreadable, reflecting the low moon's pale eye that seemed to watch over a land holding its breath. In the hush between movements, a sharp crack sliced the air, a branch breaking with a sudden snap, or perhaps a stone dislodged from shifting feet. The crowd froze. You felt the hair on your arms rise, the long stretch of night bending suddenly under the weight of an unseen threat. Shapes began to move through the dark, silhouettes drawn from exhaustion and hunger. They pressed forward with slow purpose, fragile limbs weighed down by lives stripped bare, yet each step carried the unforgiving rhythm of survival. Eyes gleamed in the half-light, wild, wary, and raw. A subtle murmur rose from the crowd, tension vibrating in the air like tightly stretched strings. Mothers hushed their children, hands pressing gestures of protection without words. The shrill bleat of a goat was torn suddenly, a sound sharp and lonely, or an answer to some silent call, before fading back into the shadow. Your hands clenched tighter around the wooden bucket, its rough grain grounding you to the cracked earth, even as the weight of what loomed pulled at the edges of your resolve. The visitor's gaze found you again through the twilight, fierce and beseeching. There was no promise here, only the stark certainty of an approaching storm. Then, as if the earth itself roused from slumber, a low chant began, a brittle, ragged sound that drifted up from the ragged figures pushing inexorably closer. It was rough and raw, a desperate rhythm echoing through the bloodline of the land, threading through every cracked surface and battle-worn heart. The flame at the village's center flickered wildly, casting fractured shadows that danced on taut faces. Every twitch of muscle and tightening jaw lit briefly before darkness reclaimed them. You caught your breath at the sight, the stubborn glow of fragile defiance against the enveloping night. From the edge of the settle, figures emerged clearer, faces smeared with dirt and desperation, eyes sharpened by fear and the bitter taste of loss. Among them, a woman paused, her gaze locking briefly with yours. There was a flicker of something in her expression, plea, warning, maybe even hope, before she melted back into the ragged procession. The visitor stepped forward once more, a low growl that slipped like venom into the quiet. They come with nothing but hunger and the edge of desperation. Tonight, survival will be claimed by those bold enough to take it. The crowd tensed as one. Whispered prayers tangled with the rustle of movement. Hands grasped worn hose and splintered poles. Faces steeled for the darkness. The air was thick now, heavy with smoke and the dust of broken earth, scenting the gathering dusk with a bitter reminder of all that had been lost. Your heart hammered, every beat a drum, calling the body to readiness and warning against faltering. The visitor's eyes burned fiercely in the gloom, a fierce spark barely dulled by exhaustion. You wanted to look away, to breathe easy, but the weight of those eyes held you steady, unflinching and unyielding. Beyond the boundaries of the village, the desperate pressed closer, their ragged shadows stretching long and thin over the cracked earth. The wind carried faint voices, snatches of murmured plans, desperate songs mingled with the moan of hunger, carrying across the distance like ghosts caught on a sigh. A sudden harsh cry shattered the fragile calm, a raw sound that tore through the night with jagged urgency. The village reacted, bodies moving quick and sure, voices rising in sharp tension. The fire flared bright and dangerous, sending sparks racing into the dark like fleeing embers. Your breath caught, pulse drowning in the sudden rush of sound and movement. You stepped forward, the rough ground crunching underfoot, each step a crack against the night's quiet. And then it happened, the first clash, a violent thread unraveling the long-held fabric of fragile peace. Shouts echoed, the clash of makeshift weapons rang sharp, and the air filled with a charged mix of fear and desperate determination. Your eyes locked on the visitor once more. Their face was set, carved by years of harsh suns and hard truth, but their voice carried the fierce pulse of something larger than any one life. "Hold fast," they said, voice low and rough, like gravel caught in a throat. "Because tonight, everything changes." A sudden movement caught your eye, figures surging from the shadows, faces intent and fierce, carrying with them a hunger that threatened to devour what little light remained. And as the night deepened around you, a terrible silence fell. A breath held so tight it seemed the world might break. The reckoning had begun. The first light of dawn did not roar in like a tempest, but slid quietly across the cracked earth, slowly pulling the village from its restless night. The fierce urgency of hours before had settled into a sullenness that clung to every mud brick wall and weathered face. Your fingers, still curled tightly around the wooden bucket, trembled only slightly now. The chaos of moments passed, folding gently into a tired stillness. Outside, the river carried its slow murmur, a whispered promise that life trembled onward, despite the scars etched into its banks. The thick smoke had drifted farther than the eye could trace, its acrid scent fading into the dry morning air, replaced by the softer, familiar rustle of dry grass and hesitant bird calls breaking through the lull. Around you, the village breathed again, fragile and uneven, like a fragile ember coaxed from nearly fallen ashes. Faces that had once worn strain like armor, softened bit by bit, eyes meeting with worn relief instead of suspicion or fear. The visitor, eyes now far less haunted, stood a little apart, shoulders loosening, as if the very weight of dread had been lifted, just a fraction. The desperate figures who had pressed close in the night were nowhere now. Some had drifted beyond the horizon, toward unknown paths. Others lingered in silent shadows near the riverbank, resting, but always watching. Hunger and despair still clung, but the worst had passed, or at least paused. The reckoning had come. Yes, but it had not shattered all. You felt the subtle shift in the air, a current breaking towards something fragile and precious. The possibility of a dawn that held space, not just for survival, but for the whisper of hope. Women moved between homes, rousing children with soft hands and quieter voices. Men tended wounds, patched cracks in earthen walls, and shared scant water like treasure. The fire, once so fierce, now glowed low and steady in the center of the village, a steady pulse of warmth and light, carving out a small sanctuary against the creeping shadow of uncertainty. For a moment, you allowed yourself to breathe, deep, slow, carrying the dust from cracked lips down to slow it in your chest. The bucket in your grasp felt light now, mere wood and water, untethered from the weight of dread. You set it down gently, the sound soft against the earth, as if not to break the fragile peace. The visitor approached, and with a voice newly shaded in calm, spoke of things yet to rebuild, not just crops or shelters, but the quiet resilience woven between these people. They spoke of the slow work ahead, not just of survival, but of small, steady healing. Eyes once clouded with anxiety flickered with cautious determination, a silent vow born in the crucible of night's reckoning. You traced a line with your fingertips over the cracked earth, imagining the sun's rise warming this tired land anew. Fields scorched and barren might yet pulse again with green, and the river that had watched countless cycles would carry life once more, swift and unrelenting. Neighbors gathered closer now, their burdens lighter, but never forgotten. The community, fractured but unbroken, stood quietly in the early light, sharing a moment of wordless communion. You felt the embrace of something you hadn't dared to hope for, a shared breath of calm after storms. The sky, once thick and sullen, began its slow bleaching into soft pastels. Pale gold reached over the distant hills, casting long, tender shadows across familiar faces worn with struggle, but edged with an unspoken promise. A breeze whispered through the village, stirring fine dust into lazy spirals, carrying with it the scent of earth, waiting to heal. You wrapped your shawl more snugly around you, the rough flax now less a scratch and more. A familiar hug from the past, from all that had been endured. The ground beneath your feet was cracked but steady, a stubborn foundation underfoot, much like the spirit gathered here. With each slow step toward the quiet well, The village seemed to exhale with you, the tension dissolving into something that felt less like fear and more like a gentle resolve. This was no triumphant victory, screamed from mountaintops, but a quiet grace, dawn turning over its page with care, a story pulled taut with struggle, but softened by unity. You glanced back once more, catching the visitor's hopeful gaze, an unspoken understanding passing between you. The reckoning had carved deep lines into every heart, but from those wounds, something new began to pulse, a fragile peace, fragile but fiercely held. The day stretched open now, not heavy with dread, but open, warm, and full of possibility. The night's dark had receded, leaving behind embers not yet cold, a light to carry through the slow hours, the slow mending. And so, with the rough earth underfoot, the soft breeze at your back, and a village still waking gently toward morning, you stepped forward. The cracked ground whispered beneath you, steady and true, as if promising that survival was no longer just endurance, but the quiet bloom of something beyond. The river beside you sang its timeless song, steady and unbroken. The shadows had retreated, leaving the day pure, and in that perfect hush, the world let go its hold on fear. Here, at last, was a moment to rest.